Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Thoughtful Talent Show. I'm Jen Werner from Jen Werner Coaching.
And I'm Chad Ahern from Talent Teams Consulting. And today we are pleased to welcome a fellow Gallup certified strengths coach and my good friend, Chris Heinz. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks, Chad. Thanks, Jen.
Yeah, we've invited Chris here to talk about the CliftonStrengths talent theme of empathy. Chris, by way of introducing him, coaches and trains business professionals to align their life and work with their personality, purpose, and priorities. He's led over 250 workshops for various organizations. Chris and his family are based in the lovely Charlottesville, Virginia, where he runs his own business, Chris Heinz Co., and teaches for the Trinity Fellows leadership program. You can find him at chrisheinz.com. We also actually learned from Chris in our pre-show that you have an upcoming challenge program. I was wondering if maybe you want to take a couple, a minute maybe to give us a lowdown and maybe let our listeners who catch this episode in time, how they might be able to sign up for it.
I would love to.
I'm going to put the mic to you now.
Great. Thanks, Chad and Jen, again for having me. I love that you're highlighting specific talent themes so we all can grow from one another. So that's cool. Yeah, listeners. So we're doing this challenge starting March 6th. It's a week-long challenge, and the title of it is 5-Day Ideal Life and Work Challenge. What I find is that some people are doing really well at work. Some people are doing really well in home life, but aren't really thinking about the connections or the relationship between work and life. And so what we're going to do is take 5 days in a row that week, March 6th week, of some daily training, some reflections, exercises to really help folks think about things like a whole life inventory, work mindset, living from your core values, identifying your core values, pay attention to your personality, and then also coming out of that, creating action steps and habits. So you really do feel like you have a cohesive, congruent life and work mix. So we'd love for any of you to jump on board. It's free, totally free. You can go to chrisheinz.com/challenge. So chrisheinz.com/challenge, sign up, get in the mix. We'd love to have you.
Awesome. That sounds fantastic and really engaging. And it actually is kind of a nice lead into our episode today, because if we're talking about empathy and the emotional wavelengths that impact us all, that sounds like a really interesting way to approach it. So thank you very much for letting our listeners maybe get a first snap at signing up. We, as I said, are really happy to have you here to talk about empathy, particularly since I know for myself, this theme is not particularly high. It's number 15 in my order. So it's actually one of my first few supporting talent themes, those that I don't use on a necessarily daily basis. So I want to start us off. First, Jen, I want to invite you. I know I normally read this, but since I've had the pleasure of introducing Chris, love for you to read us off how Gallup defines this theme to start us all off, and then maybe also tell us about where this theme falls for you.
Yeah, sure. So, and for Gallup, they define this as people exceptionally talented in the empathy theme can sense others people's feelings by imagining themselves in others' lives or situations. So like Chad said, I wouldn't call it a supporting strength for me. I do count it as one of my dominants, but it is number 10 for me. That's where it falls. So as it doesn't have the strength and passion that I believe your empathy probably does, as yours is within your top 5. So we're excited to have you here today to share with us like how this shows up for you and just tips and tricks from someone who actually has empathy high.
So that leads us into our very first question that we wanted to pose to you, and I get the pleasure, given I invited you on, of asking you first, where does this theme fall for you? Jen kind of highlighted that we know it falls in your top 5, but for our listeners, where exactly does it fall? And then maybe if you could start to share with us about kind of how this theme shows up for you? I know we're going to get to the sort of positives and negatives of how it can impact your life in a minute, but just generally, how does this show up and play out in your life?
Yeah. Well, for me, empathy is number 4
Nice.
in my top 5. And so it's my highest relationship building talent in my top 5. And I rely on it all the time to do the work that I do and to relate to people the way I do. So generally, I can sense what others are feeling. I'm often paying attention to what others may be experiencing or feeling. So I walk into a room, my radar's kind of up, and I'm like, who's feeling what? It also helps me pay attention to other people. I'm like very acutely aware of who's in the room and what may matter to them. So I'm really kind of dialed into the who in a room or in a situation. I very naturally understand other people's perspectives, or I seek to understand other people's perspectives. I often will bring the other point of view in to a room if I feel like it's missing. I think harmony can do that often also, but I want to bring in other relevant points of view and put myself in other people's shoes. So I find myself often sort of defending other perspectives or other points of view that I think shouldn't be left out. Generally too, it really helps me be in tune with family members and friends, people who really matter to me. And as a coach and a speaker, it's great to attune me to the audience or to the client, because I really feel like I can track with them as we're working together.
Nice.
Those are great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah. Chris, I'm going to bring up a couple things that you highlighted in our pre-show, just as you were starting to introduce us to how your theme, how your empathy theme and empathy talent show up for you. You talked about sort of a two-channel view. And I don't know, maybe this is something you plan on getting to later on, but I found it fascinating when you brought it up, when we talked about just sort of how this generally shows up for you, about sort of that direct conversation. And then I think you talked about sort of like a disembodied vantage point.
Yeah.
Maybe if you could go a little deeper. I don't want to massacre the idea that you brought up in the pre-show.
Yeah, I sort of think about it like the movie Ghost. If any of you have seen the movie Ghost, sorry for a spoiler alert, but it's like Patrick Swayze does pass away, and immediately this sort of second body pops up and is like seeing the scene. And I kind of think of empathy that way, where I'm like in a situation, but I have this awareness of another level, which is not just me participating in the situation, but me kind of seeing above and perceiving the other person's feelings, their experience, their perspective. And that perception is informing my participation in the moment. So it's kind of like operating in real-time mode directly, but then kind of perceiving and being aware of what's happening as well. And that input data perception informing how I participate in the situation.
Wow.
That's super powerful. I can imagine, just given that all three of us are coaches, I can only imagine how powerful that is when you're, coaching one-on-one with somebody, to have that dual channel.
Yeah, it does. It helps me pay attention to really important moments. In coaching, we want to establish a good, strong coaching presence of trust and rapport and tracking along with the client. And I have an easy job. I have other struggles with coaching, but in some ways, but what's easy for me is really tracking with the client and paying attention. Well, that really feels important. Or, you're appearing kind of upset or sad right now. Like, what's that about? So it helps me be in tune.
Nice. So with that broad understanding of kind of how it plays out, and we've talked about this in all of our other episodes about, our themes can take us to some sort of darker places and have sort of a negative impact on our work or life. I'm going to start us off there. I know Jen's going to take us back to the positive side here in a second. But talk to me about how some of those things, those natural ways of it showing up can go dark.
Yeah. Well, sometimes I can be too sympathetic with someone. Maybe catering too much to their feelings, or they're emerging into their point of view a little too much, where the line needs to be separated, or maybe where my role in their life needs to be more of direction, or maybe something I need to draw the line somewhere. And I think I can blur boundaries a little bit too easily, and being too sympathetic, because I'm very much aware and almost feel maybe their pain, their hesitance, their ambivalence. And so to kind of like draw a line feels wrong, because I'm seeing their point of view so clearly. So I can be too sympathetic. Sometimes I won't say what needs to be said, because maybe I feel like it's going to hurt their feelings, or it's not aligning with their feeling or their ethic right now. And so then I don't want to say what needs to be said. I definitely can fall into that trap. Sometimes it feels too heavy to walk with someone in their feelings or their perspective, so I will just choose to turn it off. Like, I don't want to walk this way with you, so I'll just turn it off. And maybe that's not the best thing in the moment.
Sure.
And so I can be selfish. I can be selfish with how I use my empathy, because I'm like, I'm not walking this way with you. No, because there's a kind of mutuality with empathy where I'm like, I'm walking this with you. I feel it. I see your perspective. It's a shared experience now. And they may be able to leave the situation, no attachment, just like done. We're clear page, clear slate, clean slate, but I'm still in it emotionally. And so I know that dynamic's there. So sometimes I will just not even turn it off, just like, I'm not going here with you. And maybe that's good, but sometimes that's not the best course of action.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I love hearing you say that, because it sounds a little self-preservation. And I think we talked about that in the pre-show, that sometimes things like you said, it's not in the moment for you, this stays with you a little longer than say like someone who doesn't have empathy high, and they're not using those empathy talents like that. So understanding where this might be too much for you to take on in the moment, it does sound a little bit like a self-preservation in that mode. Do you have anything else to share about how this might show up in that negative light, or can we flip it over to the positives?
Oh yeah, we can flip it to the positive.
Okay.
Let's do that.
All right. So what I love about it is that all of our themes, like Chad said, we like to call it our double-edged sword, or the dark side and the light side. So when we're using this in our best ways, and it's really benefiting our life and work, share with us some of those things. And I'd love for you to touch back on that mutuality. We'd had that in our Relator episode. If you missed that, go check that one out. But we talk about that deep sharing comes from a mutual place, and if there isn't that mutual sharing, we don't tend to continue those relationships. So I think it's a wonderful thing about the empathy theme as well.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead with
Yeah, well, some things I really appreciate about empathy is in my work of speaking or coaching or writing, it really helps me play to the audience. I will put myself in the audience shoes and think what will be helpful for them, what's extemporaneous, what doesn't matter,
Oh, sure.
throw that out, or what will be useful, what will be helpful. I really try to make my time, my words matter. I'm pretty pragmatic and pretty practical. And so I think it helps me play to the audience and make mid-course corrections. If I'm like, strategic does that as well on the thinking side, but for empathy, I'm really able to kind of dial in, be attuned to the audience or the person in front of me and go, oh, let me change course here. Let me explain this a little bit more, or I'm going too deep. Let me back off. I'm really kind of watching and waiting to see what the response is, and I can adjust my approach. That's super helpful. Super helpful for me. I also can appear to be caring and trustworthy. And it's not just a front. I really hope I am. But you know, when you open yourself up and empathize with others, that creates trust, it creates openness, you're approachable. And so that has really helped me in life and work, to just be known as someone who you can go to, you know, you can trust, you can count on him because he's open emotionally.
Mhm.
That's been really good. I think I'm known as an approachable, caring person to others. I think empathy also. Oh, go ahead, Chad.
Oh no,
Do
I
you
was
want
just
to
going
ask
to
me?
ask you. You know, we talked a little bit about this. I know it came up in our later episode, and I know that we touched on a little bit on it in our pre-show with you about um, the caring almost coming over into like an advocate
Mhm.
sort of role. And I think you had briefly talked about how this sort of plays between like you, your wife, and your kids, and
Yeah.
trying to show appropriate care to each side,
Hmm.
but then sort of a mediator advocate. Yeah, I guess if you could just go into that a little bit, because I think you described it so much better that I'm gonna
Yeah.
butcher it. But because empathy is not super high, and I've come at things from much more of a like responsibility, and you need to get done what you need to get done, and
Analytical.
coming at it from that perspective. But um, given that both you and I have kids, I think that would be a really helpful example to share.
Yeah. I'm often kind of in a mediator, translator type of role with empathy, you know, where in the family life, for example, you know, my wife may have one perspective, one view of things, my kids may have another, or between siblings, they may have different
Mm.
perspectives or interests, of course, from one another. And so I often find my role being kind of like bringing the other's perspective, helping them voice it. I'm attuned to
Mm.
that. And so I can help conversations happen. I mean, I just did that last night with kind of a high stakes situation at home. It felt high stakes at the moment, you
Yeah.
know, between family members, like kind of advocating for the other person, going, I can see what they're saying here. Let's just like dig in a little bit more and not let this fight be like the last word between you people before you all go to bed,
Yeah.
you know? And so, yeah, so I'm often like feeling what others are feeling, trying to present that to the other in order for further conversation and kind of peace to happen.
Mm.
And I'm happy doing it, but what's challenging sometimes is when I feel I get stuck between two priorities.
Mm.
Like, is my priority here to align with my wife, or is my priority here to make my kid feel really supported, or is my priority to let an older kid sort of lead the younger kid without the younger kid having to be equal in a situation? I mean, it's hard sometimes to navigate those priorities. That's where I don't like to be.
Mhm.
Um, and I feel like I'm disloyal or something to someone.
Yeah. Wow. That's
Yeah.
awesome. And one of the things that I was thinking about when you were saying that about your about last, even just last night, that you had this situation happen after we had our pre-show. I'm thinking about some of the things you shared with us about this clearing and refilling practice that you need that
Mhm.
you need to go through. And I wondered if you could share with us some of our listeners some of that
Yeah.
you shared with us earlier.
Well, a lot of my days are filled with people work, whether it's coaching sessions or it's workshops I'm leading. So a lot of it, access with I mean, time with people, which I love. But I am throughout the day kind of a sponge. I'm like sponging in people's feelings, their points of view, their perspectives, and it can be draining at the end of the day. It's exciting, thrilling work, but it can be draining. And so I find that if I don't have a sort of clearing practice before I rejoin my family for the evening, then there's not much left emotionally from me. And so I know that if it's like Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting or face to face or workshop, whatever, I really need time alone to just not intake, to not be needed by anyone, to just decompress and refill before I rejoin the family. I will know I will see a considerable difference in my energy, my mood, my behavior in the evening between whether I do have that time before I rejoin or don't, you know? Because it's sort of like if I don't, I'm like, don't even talk to me, like family. I just need, like, I'm a bear, you know? Probably a nice bear, you know, but still a bear. And that's not how I want to show up at home.
Yeah.
So what's better now is I work about 15 minutes in a co-working space away from home. And so I use that 15 minutes, you know, to decompress, you know, so that I am ready. Back in COVID days, or even when we first moved to this new town and I didn't work out of the home, because that transition just happened recently, actually, where I started working here at the co-working space. There was no decompression time, and I acknowledged it. I saw it. I knew it. So I would do things like walk the dogs, but don't invite anyone else to come with me. Like, honey, can I come? No, it's just
No.
me and the dogs,
Yeah.
you know, because I just needed that time. So, you know, that helps me. But having a clearing practice that does intentionally shift me from intake mode to like filling mode to now I'm available for my family mode has been really key.
I found that so amazing when you shared that with us, because that's something from empathy I hadn't considered, that you actually needed time to maybe wring out some of you said that idea of a sponge and you're soaking
Right.
up all of this stuff. Like maybe you need time to wring out what you've pulled in already, so that you actually have time and energy and that space to pull in more. Chad, it kind of reminds me of your learner, how you needed to soak stuff up and wring it back out later
Yeah.
to someone else.
Yeah. It's learn and then share. What I'm finding really powerful about this whole idea, and I know Chris is just one perspective on empathy, but I've heard similar things from other people I've coached with empathy. And what I'm just reflecting on is that for team leaders to recognize that if they have somebody with empathy on their team, that like them leaving maybe a few minutes early so that they have a decompression time, or taking that slightly extra long lunch, man, you know, don't get caught up on the minutes, because those minutes are valuable to somebody with empathy talents like yours, that I've been soaking up all this emotional energy, you know, whether it's all morning or all day. I need a second to like kind of, you know, clear the system, you know, flush the lines a little bit before going back into the next engagement, whether that's a workshop or an evening social, or you know, business mixer or whatever. You're gonna get so much more out of your employee or, you know, colleague or whatever if you give them that time. So that's just a beautiful takeaway. I really appreciate you sharing that perspective, because I think, you know, especially in our Western civilization work world, where it's go 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 all the time, here you're talking about that opportunity to take the pause or take the step away from the desk and do something that clears. So yeah, just, I mean, thank you very much for sharing that. Jen, I realize, not to go back in our conversation, but you mentioned that this is one of your dominants. I don't think we really ever asked you, like, in addition to what Chris has shared, are there any positives or ways that this shows up maybe a little differently in your life, negatives or positives, that you wanted to share? I just realized we kind of missed your voice, because you do have this as a dominant, and I didn't want to leave you out of this.
Sure. Yeah, it's a lot of what Chris is saying. I hadn't ever thought of the emotional, I guess I'm gonna use the word baggage, like that I'm like soaking up this energy from others, but I definitely have felt that in the past. It's a self-preservation game for me as well, and which is why I loved that Chris had highlighted that for him, because I do feel like there are conditions and moments in time when I'm like, I'm not sure that I need to be this invested in what's happening. and maybe I feel someone's oversharing, or perhaps this is going in a different direction than I'm comfortable with. And so I think my deliberative, we had talked about that a little bit in the pre-show. I think my deliberative is like, okay, hold on, like let me just take an assessment here if this is really where I want to go. But I definitely feel that. Another thing I've noticed, and I've always thought it came from my responsibility, but I also feel like the empathy might have a lot to do with that, is if someone else is hurting, even if it's not my fault, I will take responsibility and maybe even apologize for something that someone else has done or something that someone else is going through. I had joked my whole life, being from Michigan, that it must be because I'm so close to Canada, I'm sorry all the time. But I understand now, after seeing seeing how my talents are at play, that empathy and responsibility put together, I do tend to take responsibility for other people's emotions a lot of times. And that's not necessarily healthy or helpful for me. So I just thought that was just really interesting to hear the difference when it is, a top 5 versus a little lower in the scale for me.
Yeah.
So now that you brought that up, Chad, I would love to go back to, you had even started with, you've noticed it in some of the people you've coached in the past. So how do we want to spotlight, like I'd love to spotlight some of the different people that maybe the 3 of us have coached in the past that had empathy, and how this theme might have shown up differently for them. Chris, I want to start with you because you're our guest. Do you have any ideas or images or things that you've noticed in other clients?
Yeah, one thing I'll point out that's sort of in addition to what's been already said is this idea of, I've seen this in clients, avoiding work because you're feeling a lot of things. So it's sort of like you're feeling dragged down emotionally, and emotions feel very alive and real and strong. And so they're almost a deterrent from doing work, actually tactical, the tasks, all that stuff, kind of executing. So an emphasis on feelings and relating away from a need to execute, because those feelings feel very real time, very much something I need to pay attention to right now. It's very present. And that can just get in the way of work that has to be done. And so some of the coaching I've done with clients, high empathy, it's sort of learning skills to be able to come back to feelings for you to revisit later, but not in a sort of finding a way to honor them, not disregard them, but just not lean into them, not do anything with them in the moment. Revisit them later because there are more pressing things to do, like maybe your job.
Sure.
And so that's a real life client example.
I think it's a wonderful one too, because we've talked a lot about, especially in those moments where our strengths are coming on a little too strong. And we've talked a lot about this, like the power in the pause, like taking a moment to take a step back and like recenter, like this is important, but it's maybe not something I should be dealing with right now. And it sounds like that's worked for you, even in these like strong, or for others in these strong emotional cases.
Yeah,
it's great.
I'm just gonna add one other thought to this. What I really loved about the way you described that, Chris, is that the person or persons that you were describing are essentially getting caught up in the executing on thinking about their feelings instead of executing on the things that they actually need to be executing on. So it's not that it's not, like you said, it's not that they're not important. It's that they're taking the additional time to execute on the thinking about, well, what am I feeling? Or that, as you said, they're very visceral, they're very real, they're almost tangible. I need to do something with this. And so you're taking time to, walk around with those, sort of walk around those emotions and figure out, well, where do I put these down? Or how do I process these so that they're manageable, so that then I can get to the work? But that's time away from the actual other work that you need to do, and Jen and I share responsibility really high. And, it is about the execute. I mean, Jen's got 4 executing themes in her top 5. So I guess very much the instinct to get stuff done. I just picking up on Jen's question, I wanted to add to the conversation. This is one of the few places where I feel like I actually have something to offer, because with empathy being 15 and it's not super super high and super intense for me. But it's been really interesting. I've been working with a few people just over the last couple of months that have empathy fairly high on their list. And there were a couple of things that kind of struck out, and each one was a little different. So I had one that mentioned that you talked about sort of that emotional radar very early on, Chris. And this person said that they actually get a better read on individuals when they're in a group setting. And kind of the way that the image I at least came up with to understand it was, it's almost like being in a metro area and have a bunch of different radio stations. And by having the contrast, you could kind of tell, like, what's the country station, what's the rap station, what's the pop culture station. And so it was only by having that contrast versus just having a singular broadcast station, which was, well, this is what music looks like, you could start to differentiate the granularity, which I thought was absolutely fascinating.
Really interesting.
Yeah. The other one that was a bit surprising to me, and I think it's taking your sort of positive approach of understanding the perspectives that are or are not in the room, and kind of flipping it to maybe a less than ideal application of it, which is using that information to basically manipulate the conversation, which is, oh, I know what they need. I know the perspective they're going after. So I'll feed into that so that they kind of move along and maybe leave my office or leave the situation, but using that second, you talked about that 2-tier communication perspective, or that 2-tier perspective, using that in a way to move things along. So maybe I don't have to deal with a situation for as long as I want, or I can just tell this person what they want to hear so that they go and do what they need to do. That's probably one that will, I'll want to hopefully continue to address with that particular coaching client, but I thought it was a very interesting initial read on the theme. And then the other one that I found really interesting, which was using empathy almost on yourself, which was using empathy to really kind of feel and understand their own emotions. And that was the first time I'd ever heard it used with an internal focus, instead of like what we've talked about, picking up what others are kind of broadcasting. What are the feelings coming into the situation? I just thought that was it was just another perspective, and not one that I'd heard about, especially, Chris and I got trained at the same time. And I know in our training session, our facilitators were really about, this is that sixth sense talent of, you can feel beyond the traditional 5 senses of taste, touch, sight, smell. And this is that 6th one that can get in the mix. And so to have it focus internally was new.
Yeah.
So.
I don't think that happens automatically. Some folks are really good at being attuned to their own feelings, but I think empathy can kind of cloud the feeling picture, because you can be sensing other people's feelings. There's residue of other people's feelings, and we have to work to go, how am I doing? Like checking in with ourselves and really go, what is like I need to dust off those people's feelings and sort of be aware of what I'm feeling. So I think it can, that sort of self-attunement or self-awareness of one's emotions can vary from person to person in empathy.
Yeah.
I think it's great you both brought that up, because that was one of the things I saw most in the clients that I coach that have empathy high, is that they were able, like they felt exactly like you're saying, Chris, like they could pull in these emotions, understand what's happening with the people around them, but it clouded their own feelings and emotions in that moment, and that it would just drain them. Like if they were around someone who was really upset about something, even if they weren't talking about it, they could feel it, and to a point where they were just emotionally drained from that situation. They don't even know what it is, but that they can feel that emotion. So that I love the conversation here about how they could even like tap back into their own emotions and really see like what's going on with me. Is this something I need to carry? Like in those instances where they don't even know what that is, even though they're picking it up.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good practice to have throughout the day for folks high in empathy, is to, periodically during the day, just check in and go like, what's mine, what's not mine. It's the same question I ask with high responsibility too, but that's more in terms of owning things, right? So I do the same with emotions. What's mine, what's not mine, and it's almost too much to do it at the end of the day if you have a lot of people interaction. If you're working by yourself all day, okay, that's a different story. But if you're having a lot of contact with people, I think doing it multiple times a day is good, because you can really lose touch of yourself and how you're doing if you don't make it a practice.
Yeah.
That's great advice.
One other perspective, I realized just now that there was one other way in which I've heard empathy, I assume it could probably be used as both good and bad. But I've heard from some people that have empathy that they almost have kind of premonitions about like something coming, like somebody's pregnant but they haven't told anybody yet, but just somebody with empathy like sitting next to them, they're like, something's up, isn't it? Is there something you want to share? I've heard that. Does that resonate with either of you? Like, if you sensed things that were about to happen, or you think it's going to happen, and then like 2 weeks later something unfolds that like, yeah, that's kind of what I thought was going to happen.
Jen, do you want to go first?
Only in that and I think it comes from a different place for me a little bit. But it's that something's not said. Like there's something there that's happening and it's in the background. It's not being said, but like you can, like you said, you can feel it. There's something up here, and I'm not that great at understanding what that is, but I know something's like, something's afoot here. Chris, how about with you?
Well, the baby example is funny because that's happened twice to me in the past 3 months, maybe.
Oh, geez.
Oh my gosh.
I was talking to this one guy on the phone. It's so funny. This one guy on the phone that I knew from Pennsylvania, our old town. We hadn't talked in a while, and he's talking, and he's like a fairly newlywed. Like we're just talking, and I just said, "So when's the baby due?" And he's like, "What? How do you know this?" And he just was like, "I just know. Didn't you tell me this already?" He's like, "No, we're not telling anyone."
Oh my gosh.
So that was kind of interesting. And then the other one was similar, where I just knew the wife was pregnant before it was said. And so I'm not like the baby whisperer or anything like that.
And I didn't mean to jump on that example as like the example, but it was I forget where empathy lands for my wife, but she has this weird sort of sixth sense around things that are going to happen at work or major announcements.
Wow.
And it brought up this whole thought process around feeling things and being aware at sort of that sixth sense level. And I was just wondering if that plays out for either of you. And that's so if we want to keep focusing on the babies, great, but that was not the only place that I saw this happening, and want to just clarify that I was using that as purely one example.
That's pretty amazing though, Chad, that even Chris had 2 examples recently of this happening. Just makes me laugh. It also makes me think, if you have someone close to you who has empathy high, your secrets may not be as hidden as you think they are, right?
True. Yeah.
Interesting. So we've had a lot of fun with this baby whispering thread, but I want to keep us moving along here. Think about other images we can use to think about this instead of baby whisperer. Chris, when you think about this theme or trying to describe it to somebody, are there images that come to mind? In past episodes, we've referenced pop culture. We've just images that we see on a daily basis, items around our house that we might, click into as an image to keep in mind. We're all fairly visual creatures in general. Just wondering if there's an image that maybe some people that might not even have empathy that high could keep in mind when they think about this theme that could be a reference point.
Well, I think of empathy like a sponge. We've talked about it already, where we're sort of soaking up, intaking people's feelings, their experiences, their perspectives, and we're getting quite full. We're getting quite full by the end of the day with what we're absorbing. So I think of empathy like a sponge. We need to be like squeezed out, periodically in order for us to take on new. Because I do think we can hit a tipping point where it's just like overwhelm. That's why a clearing practice is helpful, because then it readies us to receive maybe from our family, our loved ones, or just for the next person that shows up. So I think of a sponge. I also think of a golden retriever. We've got this great golden retriever, so loyal, so really empathetic. Like he knows when something's up, and he'll go and just put his head on your lap, or he'll just look up with his big puppy, not puppy anymore, but big doggy eyes. He's loyal. He's trustworthy. He's really in tune, I feel like, emotionally as well. So I think of the golden retriever, and I also think of a heart as a symbol. Just empathy. We're kind of open-hearted. We choose to be, sometimes we don't, but sort of open-hearted and available, open access, and rich emotionally.
Okay. Awesome images to start us off. Jen, did you have any to add?
Yeah, I love the golden retriever one. I'm not adding to it as much as I'm agreeing, and that dogs in general tend to have that ability to do that. That's why they have like the pet therapy programs, where you take the animal in and it makes the kids feel better. I've also seen way too many YouTubes and different little snippets of videos of an owner with a limp, or they hurt their leg and they're not using it anymore, and next thing you know, their four-legged dog will walk on three legs. Like the things that our dogs can sense and pick up from us, I think are just amazing, and have had that experience personally with my dog, where I'm so anxious now I've made him anxious. So I think that bringing that point up as a reminder to those who maybe don't have empathy high, that if you have someone close to you that does, they are probably sucking these emotions from you and feeling them as well.
Yeah, kind of on that point, I learned something genetically. The difference between a wolf and a house, like a dog, a house pet, a dog, is this one trait of openness to experience. So wolves are more cautious. They're not really open to stimulus or different experiences. So they're they're cautious, protect themselves. Whereas dogs in a house are open to experience. They're warm. So I think that empathy is pretty open to expression, pretty open to feelings, emotions, and experiences. And so I think the golden retriever idea might actually be a pretty good image, because folks who are highly empathetic are kind of open to various expressions, experiences in their environment.
So great.
Yeah.
That's interesting about wolves. I didn't know that. Thanks for the little extra tip there.
Thanks,
Chad,
Netflix.
Thanks, Netflix.
Chad, did you have any images?
Yes. So I've already brought up sort of the emotional radar station, whether you're broadcasting or receiving. But I think that there was another one that really kind of struck me, particularly when we were talking in our pre-show about both of you have brought up this mutuality of openness and whether you're kind of sharing. And when we're talking about that, I started to think about, for those of you that are Star Trek fans, that Spock mind meld, where the reaching in and really trying to understand how somebody's feeling, but then there's also got to be a little bit of openness. I mean, I think Spock says in one of the movies, it works better when the person actually wants to participate or will allow me to enter their mind. So that was one image that sort of struck me when both of you were talking about that mutuality aspect of this set of this set of themes, these set of talents. Sorry, I got tongue tied. So yeah, that would be the only other image I had. I being a dog guy myself, I completely get the dog analogy. So I'll throw a little extra, thumbs up on that one too. So, so moving away from images and how you've kind of lived this out for yourself, one of the things we've always liked to try and cover in these episodes is start to think about the impact on teams, right? By nature, we're usually a pretty collaborative species. We're in work environments where we tend to build collaborations, and as strengths coaches, we know that we need each other. But we also know that each talent theme can go kind of dark or have a negative impact on a team. And so I'm going to open this up to you, Chris, first. If you could think about maybe a couple potential negative impacts, particularly as we think about a leader that might have empathy. And then also if you want to maybe answer for sort of an individual contributor, or somebody that's not necessarily leading the team, but is actively contributing, if they're bringing in their empathy a little hot, or not at all, what are the negative implications?
Yeah, well, I think a negative implication for a team leader might be sort of being too attuned to the person's feelings. So not giving him or her real feedback, critical feedback, maybe not holding him or her accountable, because you're sort of so wrapped up in the person's feelings and personal experience that you're not saying what needs to be said or doing what needs to be done. I think that could be a negative on a leader. I also think that sometimes leaders high in empathy, although you want to develop, you want to develop strong emotional intelligence and social awareness and all that, sometimes they can be too dialed into emotions and not where it can turn maybe more thinking oriented people off, or maybe more sort of executing oriented people off, because it's like a little bit too feeling oriented, a little too mushy. Yeah. I've seen that. On the flip side, for individual contributors, like we said before, what can be negative on a team is being too feeling oriented, not getting one's work done. That can be negative. And then therefore you're kind of seen as a little bit unreliable in your workload. That's one. I also think that if you're too empathetic, meaning you're experiencing a lot of emotions and they're deep, that you can come across a little bit unpredictable. And on a team, you want to know what you can expect from team members. Yeah. And so highly empathetic people can come across a little bit just like a loose cannon. What are they going to get today from this team member? So that could be a negative as well.
That's a really good point about the unpredictability. I was thinking about LinkedIn post I just put up, kind of re-reviewing the 4 needs of followers, and one of them stability. And so, yes, leaders have a call to fulfill those needs, but our peers do to a certain extent also. If we don't have a stable environment to come into and kind of know what to expect, that can be really off-putting. I think that's a great share. I very much would reinforce all those ideas. The one I would love to, I want to hear from Jen, then I've got a couple I know I'd like to to voice out, because I think they're pretty important. But Jen, I'd love to hear from you as well.
I think going back to what I heard, what we were talking about earlier, and what I've heard from others is that like a negative, like the negative emotions, if there's a lot of negative emotions in the team, they can tend to shut down maybe. And so it's like what we talked about before, maybe they're not engaging because of whatever else might be going on around them. And so they've pulled themselves out of it. And that can also lead to that instability, not really understanding where that person comes from, or maybe even in the compassion sense, you know, from our team members and our team leader, we need that compassion for one another. So I think this is another place where if you've either decided you're going to dial it way up or way down and you're just shutting off completely, that you could negatively impact your team either way there. Chad, did you want to share yours?
Yeah, I just the only other big one that I would add is that I think, particularly for a team leader, somebody with empathy, while it's great to use that to understand the team, and we're going to get to the positives in a second, when it comes to decision making and leading almost too much with intuition versus what the data might be telling you. Now, I will, for full disclosure, I have analytical as number 5. So I, very much love a black and white answer, something that's data driven, that's been metriced out. Those all things are appealing to me. But if you've got a bunch of, me like people on your team, and you as a team leader are going, well, my empathy and my intuition is telling me we're going to go in this opposite direction, you really start to cause a rift with those around you that might be looking for, how are we actually thinking through decisions instead of just gut feel. So I think that's something that, particularly if they go too far, they might start to ignore solid data. So just that's one place that I would add. I think the other things that the other comments I had were along the lines of what you shared about, just getting too wrapped up in the emotions of the team and sort of leading to that indecision because you're trying to balance it all. Going back to, I think it was Chris, you made the point of trying to figure out what's yours, what's not, and what decisions are mine, what's, am I basing those on those people, that person's feelings, or my own feelings, or my own sense of this situation, or somebody else's sense of the situation. So just that lends itself to indecision, because now you're not sure where your decision making is coming from. I think the only other thing I would add for the individual contributor side is they absorb so much emotional weight that they cannot constructively contribute. That I think that's in line with some of what you shared already, is that they just become so overwhelmed. It's kind of going back to that, I can't get my work done, but now you're in a team situation. Now you can't even positively contribute, never mind get your own work done. So yeah. So
let's pull this back to like how we can positively contribute to the team, whether from the team leader's perspective and the team in the individual contributors. I'd love to hear your insights on how you feel this talent can help us, Chris.
Well, Chad mentioned the top 4 needs of followers, security being one of them. We know hope for the future is another one. 2 more would be trust and care from those leaders. And I think empathy is a really, really great talent to use to build the trust and the care on your team. There's other ways to build it too. You don't have to have a relationship team to build trust and care, but empathy is a really great way to do that. And so if you can empathize with your team, express regard for their feelings and their experiences, be in tune with them, like that's going to be a commodity really for you as a leader. So that's great. I also think that if you have high empathy, you have a pretty good pulse of the team itself, what the team's thinking, feeling. If you don't have high empathy, that's a great role for a contributor on the team to serve you, in them sort of communicating the pulse, the vibe, the feeling of the team, if you're not so inclined to pick that up.
what I'm hearing is like almost being an advocate or the voice for others then in that case.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah,
And
sorry. I
and
didn't
probably
mean
you're
to cut you off.
trusted if you're an individual contributor with high empathy, you're probably trusted by your team as well to represent them because you
Mhm.
do that pretty well naturally. And so it's really great. It's really a mediator advocate who can speak and be trusted both by leader and also rest of team.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
It's a great point.
Mm-hmm.
Jen, I know you asked the question, but I'm going to jump right back to you because you've got this theme much higher than I do and probably use it a little bit more frequently. So, what are your thoughts on leaders that have this or individual contributors that have this and the contributions they make?
I want to go back to that intuition conversation we had in the negative impacts, because like you guys were saying that, yeah, that you might have a leader who has a team full of analyticals and they want, the hard data before we move on. But you might be a leader with high empathy and you just know that this is the right thing for the team. This is the right thing moving forward. I think that's another thing that that empathy is really this strong ability to pull together what might be right for the individuals and then make a decision for the team moving forward, where I hadn't ever really thought that through before our pre-show. But after listening to the conversation, the discussion, understanding how it works for you, how it shows up for me, and then really thinking back to some of the leaders and the team members that I've been part of before that had empathy high, I could see that intuition, that ability to sense those emotions, know how they're going to land, and be able to make decisions for the team moving forward, I think is a just really powerful, just beautiful place. Yeah.
I'll
Great use of the
definitely,
talent.
yeah, I'll definitely second that one. That was going to be one that I was going to bring up.
Sorry.
No, it's great that you got out in front of it because, it's definitely, I see, not as one that does not have empathy high. I do see that there's a balance there. It's kind of a yin and yang. You've got to have the right balance of, the solid data, but then every once in a while, there's going to be that gut call that's just got to be made. And maybe,
Yeah.
those of us with learner and analytical and, a couple other themes that are very much about processing and thinking big, broad, we may not have the time to go deep. And so sometimes you need somebody to step in with that intuition and make the call. So I very much second that.
Well, Chad, hopefully at that point, if I'm your leader with empathy and you're my team member with high analytical and learner, I've got your best interests at mind. I'm thinking about how this is going to land for you
Yeah.
and how it's going to work out, how it's going to feel. So chances are I'm already coming to you with some of the information to help you feel better about the decision, even without having all of the hard data there.
Yeah.
So I think that's the wonderfulness of using these talents together and understanding each other and, having this language to explain really what's going on.
Yeah. I'll just build on what we've said so far. The only other real big contribution I saw, particularly from a team leader perspective, is not just the pulse of the team, but really sort of the emotional health of the team. How is this team doing? I got reflecting on this after we held our pre-show, and thinking about the last 2 years in terms of coming out of a lot of change and how people are feeling about all of it, and just being able to accurately describe that emotional state and kind of surfacing that for whether it's team discussion or whether you're being the advocate further up into the organization. If you're a frontline leader, are you reporting to a VP or a C-suite person, and really be able to verbalize that emotional health of where your frontline people are at, I think could be really a great contribution of these talents and how they can be used to improve the team and to be that advocate for the team. So that was going to be my only other big contribution to that conversation. So anything else from either of you? Okay, so as we wrap the show up, we always like to sort of come to some summary points, so that especially if somebody's come to this far into the show, we've covered a lot of ground. Chris and Jen, I really want to invite both of you to maybe throw out, what are one or two things that you really think people should keep in mind, very top line thoughts on these talent themes, and maybe how to engage people who have them, or if you've got them, how to use them in their best way.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
All right. Well, I think of empathy as being aware of other people's feelings and experiences, as well as advocating for other people. And so there's this dual kind of awareness and advocating that happens with empathy, which is really powerful. That's one. Another thing I would say is that I think empathy gives validity and attention to people's feelings and experiences in a way that we will feel known deeply by folks high in empathy. I think that is a treasure that others with high in empathy can offer the world, is the sense of you being known in deep ways, you feeling validated, paid attention to, and advocated for through this wonderful talent theme of empathy.
Oh, that was beautifully
Awesome.
said. Beautifully said.
I'm not sure I'd be able to summarize it that well. So thank you, Chris. That's
Very good.
Jen, do you want to add any extra points to that, or
I feel
just
like
let
that was a mic drop moment. Yeah, that was beautiful, Chris, because that is something, knowing that it's not terribly high for me, but knowing I have others that are close to me that have empathy high, that is how they make me feel. I know I'm validated and loved, and that they truly can sense my emotions and take that on to help me get through whatever that might be, in the moment. And I just think that's a beautiful place to come with this talent. And I'm so glad you said it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So with that, we're going to wrap up our show. I don't want to put it much more on Chris's awesome mic drop there. So I'm just going to give my usual plug for those of you that have listened to our whole episode. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, we encourage you to leave reviews, leave us comments. We're going to have Chris's contact information in the show notes, especially his link to the challenge, which I think is awesome that we highlighted at the top of the show. But we just encourage you to come back and keep listening. We're going to keep having coaches like Chris on to keep exploring a lot of the other CliftonStrengths talent themes. And with that, I'm going to thank again our wonderful guest, Chris, my fellow co-host, Jen, and we're going to wish everybody a great day. And thank you for listening. So
thank you.
Thanks. Have a great day, everyone.